Hey everybody, this is Warren Haynes from Gov't Mule, and I'm here with Premier Guitars, the Big Five. What is my favorite guitar? I would have to say my 59 Les Paul. Everyone is different, I guess, but there's something about those guitars, 57, 58, 59, the Les Pauls, that just have a different character and make you play differently, inspire you. As far as what drew me to Les Pauls in the first place, a lot of my favorite guitar players growing up had that warm, creamy tone that you can only get from a Les Paul, or, to varying degrees from Gibson guitars in general. But every time I would hear this certain sound, I would find out what it was, and oh yeah, that's a Les Paul. And of course, they're not cheap, so it took me a long time as a kid to even acquire a cheap one. I didn't really have my first Les Paul until the late '80s. But I played SGs for a long time, and I played hollow body Gibsons for a long time. But every time I pick up a Les Paul, it feels more like my voice. My old guitar tech, Brian Farmer, who passed away a few years ago, he used to say that had the best sounding bass pickup that he had ever heard in a old Les Paul. And I haven't heard enough to say that that's definitely the case, but it's a beautiful sound. As far as what drew me to that guitar, I would say the character it has when you plug it in. It's not as easy to operate as my signature model Les Pauls are, and you have to nurture it a little more, and you have to treat it with a little more love and respect, but you can hear the difference on the recordings. It's a subtle difference, and I'm sure not everyone can hear it, and I'm sure not everyone would even prefer it. But, as guitar players, we're all kind of anal about that stuff, and you're trying to get something that's in your head that's forever evasive. Old guitars don't play as in tune as new guitars. And they don't play as easy for the most part, which is kind of cool because it makes you fight it a little bit more. And anytime you're fighting your guitar a little bit, you're kind of forced to slow down and take longer pauses and play fewer notes. And I always find that that's usually a good thing. Also, when you hit a note on a beautiful sounding instrument, you want to let that note last a little longer because it's so beautiful. It's like when you hear a great singer hit one note. Well, one note's enough because it sounds so great. And so really good sounding instruments inspire you in that way. You hit a note and you go, I think I'll just hold this for a bit. My Les Paul is rather light. I don't remember the exact weight of it, but as old ones go, it's not the lightest one I've ever played, but it's pretty light, and thankfully so, because Les Pauls in general are heavy instruments, and we're known for playing long shows. And since I play a Les Paul most of the time, playing one for 3 hours is a bit much. I've grown used to it through the years. On the other side of lockdown, it was a little crazy getting used to holding a Les Paul for 3 hours again, because having not done that for a year and a half, it's not as easy as it was. It's taken me a minute to build back up to it. My Les Paul is pretty much as is. I haven't really done anything to it, and thankfully so. They weather so well. As they get older, they tend to just look more beautiful, and it's a beautiful instrument. It probably started out much more sunburst than it is now. That tends to change through the years. What is my Desert Island album? I've been asked that before, and that's a really tough question, because if we talked every day for a month, I could give you a different one every day. One that I've kind of settled on is and it's kind of cheating, is the Willie Dixon chess box, because I think it's only 2 CDs or 3 CDs. I think it's just 2, but it's all the best blues artists doing Willie Dixon songs. It's got Howlin' Wolf and Otis Rush and Coco Taylor, and you have the double whammy of being all these great Willie Dixon songs, but also just the different interpretations. Little Milton, and it's just fabulous. What is my biggest guitar culture pet peeve? I think that's a multi-part question or a multifaceted answer. Guitar players tend to get lost in this tiny world that we've created for ourselves. And what do I mean by that? Trying to get your guitar to sound a certain way, which I'm as guilty as anyone, when in the long run it really doesn't make as much difference. What makes the difference is what you actually play. And so part of that answer is also that technique is not as important as sometimes we make it out to be. It is very important, especially in the early stages, because you want to be able to pull off what you're feeling and what's in your head. But if you rely too much on technique, then your voice becomes less important. So I think it's important for guitar players to, at some point, even though we're all geeks and guitar freaks, it's important to remember how to listen like a non-musician, because that's what the rest of the world is hearing. When they listen to music, and I've said this as an example in the studio, nobody gives a shit what the snare drum sounds like. Nobody cares about how much EQ or reverb is on the vocal. What they care about is if the guy's singing his ass off or the woman is playing their ass off. It's something that translates regardless of whether it's captured well or not. And what I mean by that is a terrible recording of a great performance is better than a great recording of a terrible performance. And there's no question about that. So it really all comes down to feeling what you're doing and getting out of your own way and just kind of letting the music be what it is and not being too anal about, oh, I'm out of tune, my tone sucks, I'm rushing I'm ahead of the beat, I'm not playing fast enough, And all those things are important, but they're important in your bedroom. They're important when you're practicing. But when you're actually playing music, they're not important. And which brings us to another point. You have to learn how to play with other musicians. That's really the key. And not just from a performance standpoint, but for your own satisfaction. And I think when you find people you can play with, your life just gets so much better. Which guitar hero of mine would surprise or even shock some people? I have so many that are coming from so many different directions. I would probably say Steve Howe from Yes, and it wouldn't shock people that study guitar, because everybody that studies guitar knows what a great musician he is. They might be surprised that someone like myself is a big fan. I've been a fan since the early 70s, and I would have to list him as one of my absolute favorite guitar players. That doesn't mean that I'm hugely influenced by him, because the musical path that I chose long ago is quite different from Yes or from Steve Howe's playing, but for my personal taste and satisfaction, I just really love what he does, and I'm a huge Yes fan. Steve Howe's playing has that same kind of sloppiness that Jimmy Page has, that makes it even more real than if every note was perfect. And I love that, because I would much hear somebody in the moment going for it 110% than somebody just playing within their comfort zone and utilizing technique but not challenging their brain. I think that's such a beautiful part of those early Yes records, is that it has this vulnerability and this kind of extremely human quality about it, even though there are these complex, classically influenced arrangements. And of course there's a lot of jazz influence as well, but you also hear the folk influence and the bluegrass influence, and however that all got filtered through his brain just turned out to be this unique style that I've never heard anyone else sound like that. And I think that's a wonderful thing. It's funny, I'm reminded of a story where B.B. King said that every great musician has at least one influence that you would never expect. And then the person he was talking to said, "Oh, really, who would yours be?" And he said, "Django Reinhardt." And wow, B.B. King listened to Django Reinhardt. It makes total sense, you know. And if there's a guitar player that hasn't listened to Django Reinhardt, they should start today listening to Django Reinhardt. What's my secret weapon? Well, I guess that I could interpret that a couple of different ways. If the question is from a gear standpoint, what's your secret weapon? I always like taking small amplifiers and when I'm recording, blending the small amplifier into whatever big amps that I'm using. In the studio, I usually use 2 or 3 amps run together, and 1 or 2 of them will be 50 watt or 100 watt heads through a 412 cabinet, but one of them will always be some small amplifier that when you put it into the mix rounds out the mid-range in a way that when you take it away you completely miss it. I have this Alessandro recording amp that I've been using all the time recently, and if I'm using my big amps, I blend it in with the other amps and it makes a huge difference. Or sometimes I just use it alone and it sounds amazing. There are several records where I've just plugged straight into that little Alessandro and it records extremely well. I think most of the amps that I record with is like an 8-inch speaker or a 10-inch speaker. Sometimes even a 6-inch speaker. And I think the smaller speaker helps fill out the mid-range a little bit. Lower wattage amps record so well because they're being pushed at the exact volume they're designed to work at. You know, when you're using a 100 watt head or a 50 watt head, you have to crank it up to really get the spirit of the amplifier, what it is really designed to do. And then it's so loud, it's deceptive. Anything that loud sounds amazing in its own sort of way, but a small amp, you can dial it in easier. And a lot of these old amps, like I also use a Gibson Skylark, which is one knob. There's not even a tone knob. There's a volume knob, and if you plug, it's not good with a Les Paul, but it's good with anything bright, any single coil pickup, and you plug in, and if you like the way it sounds, you turn the volume up to the point that it feels the best, and that's your sound. And they were onto something back then. They knew what they were doing. Now, what is my secret weapon as a guitar player? I think maybe the fact that I started singing before I started playing guitar helped me gravitate towards all these great guitar players that sing through their instrument, that have this vocal quality about what they play. And that's in so many different ways. The tone, I want my tone to sound like a human voice, hopefully my voice. So part of what I'm looking for is for my sound, my guitar tone to kind of sound like my singing voice and vice versa. When you hear B.B. King or Bonnie Raitt, that's the feeling you get, is that the guitar and the voice are the same thing. But when you hear all my favorite guitar players, whether it's Jeff Beck or Carlos Santana or Duane Allman, B.B. King being the perfect example and Albert King being a perfect example, I just love all musicians that sound like they're singing through their instrument, and some of that is being influenced by vocal phrasing. Vocalists have to take a breath. They don't have any choice. So guitar players don't. You can play a million notes and you can string them all together, but it probably sounds better if you don't, if you take a breath and pause for the cause like a singer does. So I think one of my secret weapons as a player is that I think in melodic phrases. I think in vocal sort of phrases. And that doesn't mean that sometimes I don't want to push myself out of that comfort zone and do something different, because I do, and I think everybody should challenge their own instincts as well.